Is it wrong to celebrate success? Is it wrong to encourage? No, we're a church of honor and a church of encouragement. We love to celebrate when we see people do incredible things. But there's this line that we cross where our drive turns into pride. Pride, what is it? It's when we elevate ourselves. It's when we live for our own elevation. It's when we reserve ourselves the final say and we put walls up to challenge. And I think even about being a dad, and so often as dads, we can be guilty of this, can't we? We can often equate being a hero as being somebody that always gets it right and never struggles, doesn't show weakness, and don't you dare ever admit your loss. It's because all around the world, I think humanity's kind of been humbled in the last few months, haven't we? Here we are, coronavirus, a microscopic, invisible enemy that's managed to shut down stock markets, that's turned the world's most magnificent cities into ghost towns. It's put the drive of humanity on hold. And, in some of our nations, we're beginning to move out of that. And in some, we're not even have hit the worst of it yet. But it's almost like this reminder, isn't it? It's this humbling reminder that as people, yes, humanity is inventive, creative, awesome, innovative. And yeah, we're going to move forward. We're going to become smarter. We're going to become more able. And I believe that God's written that capacity within us. But it's this reminder that we're not gods. That actually we can't click our fingers and just change it all. But it's also this convicting challenge about what we put our hope in. The things that we use to crown ourselves, the self-reliance is. You see, humility is the currency of heaven. And yet so often we're dealing in the currency of pride. In Philippians chapter 2, we see some incredible verses about Jesus and humility. Let's take a look at it. Chapter 2, I'm going to start in verse 5. It says this: your attitude, our mindset, our approach should be the same as that of Jesus Christ, who, even though he was being the very nature of God, let's just pause there for a second. Jesus was God. Jesus had all the glory, all the splendor, all the might, all the power, all the resources. That's what it meant to be God. Even though he was the very nature of God, he did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. And what that word grasped means in the original is mean something to be held onto, something that was, he couldn't let go of. And then verse 7, but instead made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in the appearance of man, of woman, of you and I, and all our flaws, our failings. Think about Jesus was born in the most humble of circumstances, lowered himself further than he could have possibly gone. In that likeness, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. The cross was this humiliating place. It wasn't just agonizing. It wasn't just painful. It was the worst kind of death you could have experienced at the time. And these verses say that Jesus, who really was the King of Kings, who really was the Lord of all, marked history not because he held on, but because he surrendered and laid it down. You see, right now as humankind, we've got an opportunity to hit reset and humble ourselves, to come back to God. But we've got to start to challenge the pride that so easily has become centric to many of our lives. You see, when we spend out in our lives through pride, it can have the appearance of value, but it's actually just putting us in debt. And not just debt, but debt upon debt. Whereas humility is the currency of heaven. It actually returns more than you could ever spend out. So often with humility, we struggle with it because it requires sacrifice. But there's a couple of key problems we've got with pride. You see, pride shuts out the option of kind of ever being wrong. It puts up these walls around us and says, I'm right, I know this, and I'm not moving. But the reality is, since when were you or I always right? And yet pride, it becomes like this armor, and we put up these walls and we raise up these shields, but we don't know that we're not actually protecting ourselves in doing that, but sometimes we're even harming ourselves. You see, pride puts up these walls, but humility tears them down. See, pride draws lines around how you and I understand ourselves. It makes us inaccessible to change. But again, I don't know about you, but I don't know everything I need to know right now. There's this humility that can keep us open to growth and change, and even open us up to things that perhaps we don't even understand. You see, pride can kill off things in our lives that we don't even realize. You see, this word pride is such a dangerous thing. Again, like I said, is it wrong to take encouragement when we do something right or do something well? No, but we got to understand that if we want to be followers of Jesus, and not only that, if we want to live the lives that we know are possible, it's going to take the transformational path of humility. I want to ask you today a really challenging question. What has pride cost you? Maybe even what is pride costing you right now? Let's pick up verse 6 again. Who, being the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, to be held on to. You see, I think pride often works in our life by causing us to hold on to things that we need to let go of. If you want to become a man or woman, a person of humility, a follower of Jesus, marking history in the way he did, you got to learn to let go. What are you holding on to right now that's holding you back? You know, I think that if we're going to be people of humility, we need to practice letting go. We need to actually almost make a habit of it. We need to make a discipline of it. Because so often pride will whisper in our ears, but you work so hard for that. Or what will they think if you... Whereas humility says, lay it down. Just think about it. Jesus, who being the nature of God, was able to lay it all down for you and for me. There's something so powerful that we've got to learn to let go. But the next bit, isn't it interesting, this phrase, he didn't consider equality with God something to be held on to. Isn't it true that for so often in human history, when we really think about it, we're kind of desiring and searching for that God-like status, the equality with God. And this drive within us, it comes all the way back to the beginning. Because we believe as Christians that there's God and he's good, but there's also this enemy, the devil. The Bible teaches us that he didn't start out bad. The Bible teaches us that, in fact, actually, he was a good angel, close with God, in fact, in charge of worship. But at some point, this desire for equality with God got some traction in his own life. The Bible says that on account of his own pride and beauty, he wanted what was God's. You see, as humankind, we're repeating the same process. In fact, the Bible teaches us that humankind fell at this very temptation. If you eat this apple, your eyes will be open and you'll be like God. This whole desire for equality with God has run within us since the beginning of time. There's this story right at the beginning of the Bible called the Tower of Babel. And it was when humankind wanted to build this great tower for their own splendor, to reach up to the heavens so they could be like God. And we're still doing it today, aren't we? Skyscrapers built. And, you know, yes, some of it's about art and engineering and awesome just feats of achievement, but there's something that runs underneath it. And it's this human desire for equality with God. And yet, actually, the problem is as we're reaching for that in the way that we are, we're actually robbing ourselves of the very closeness with God that we could have through humility. You know, it's incredible. The verses don't stop there. But in verse 9, it there says, after Jesus had been obedient to death on a cross. Verse 9, and therefore God has exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name. It's that in Jesus humbling himself, he was actually able to take hold of the very thing we're searching for by living these lives of pride, this closeness with God. You see, that drive within us, it's not a wrong thing. It's going to drive us towards desiring and chasing after God. But if we're doing it for our own glory, we're going to miss it entirely. Where are there areas in your life, in my life, that we're almost chasing after our own crowns? In fact, and actually we need to have to chase after the crown of Christ. So what did Jesus do? And what do we need to do? Well, let's go back to verse 6 and verse 7. It says here that he made himself nothing, that he humbled himself in verse 8. You see, so often we look for our circumstances and events in our life to humble ourselves, but actually we need to be doing that before our circumstances and our scenarios need to humble us. If we want to be people of humility, we've got to make a practice of humbling ourselves. What's that look like? It looks like recognizing our flaws. It looks like recognizing we can't do it all on our own. It looks like saying sorry. It looks like confessing and repenting. It looks like asking for help. Or we could embrace the reality that we're not God's, that actually we need him. You see, humility is the path. It's the gateway to God's power moving in our world. God says again in his word, doesn't he? If my people would humble themselves and pray, I'd listen, hear, and answer. You see, humility is the gateway to the power of God working in our world. You see, I believe the primary fruit of humility is confidence. If we know that it's not about us, it's not on us, I don't know about you, but that actually gives me peace and gives me confidence. That actually I'm trusting in something so much bigger than my own capacity, something so much bigger than my own best efforts can even get close to. That gives me confidence. We need to be the voice calling out, bringing people back to humility. It's something so powerful at stake here for our world and for our communities. You see, I love these final verses of this section. Let me read them to you again. Verse 9. Therefore, God has exalted Jesus to the highest place, gave him the name above every name, that at that name of Jesus, every knee would bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. But there's a comma there, and it says, to the glory of God the Father. So this week, church, here's my question. How can you and I live in greater humility than ever before? I got 4 things that I want to encourage you to do. Firstly, I want you to make it a habit to acknowledge that you can't do it on your own. Secondly, what do you need to let go of that's holding you back? Thirdly, how can you humble yourself this week? And finally, what does it say? He took the form of a servant. One of the greatest ways that we can stay humble is to find daily opportunities to serve. Husbands serving wives, wives serving husbands, children serving parents, serving in the church, serving in our communities, serving